I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Richie Marino. I go by Richie, and I'm an organizer with Harvard for Bernie. And the reason that we wanted to put on this town hall is because a lot of students who were a part of a variety of Students for Bernie groups across the country are now asking themselves, what's next? Now that the Bernie campaign is suspended, it has not ended, it is suspended. A lot of students are looking for new campaigns to become a part of and support. And when, internally here at Harvard for Bernie, we saw Ihssane, Joshua, Shahid, and Samelys as, people that we saw as leaders within this movement, the movement for racial, economic, environmental justice, specifically justice for those who are poor or working class. So we really saw, these four candidates as warriors for the working class. And that's why we wanted to invite you to this town hall so you can get a chance to, hear about what students are concerned about, what they care about, and, what issues are most important to them. And in turn, we hope that the students who have joined us can get exposed to your campaigns, your candidacies, the platforms that you're running on. And we're hoping that they're, students who are on this call are inspired and motivated to get more involved with some of these campaigns. And that's the type of work that we want to be doing. We want to be connecting students who are already trained as organizers and who have been volunteering with the Bernie Sanders campaign now. And I know from personal experience, we put our blood, sweat, and tears into the Bernie campaign. And now, we want to continue, the fight for justice for the working class. And hopefully they can do that with your campaigns going forward. So that being said, can we just go around and have each, panelist, each congressional candidate, take about 2 minutes or so to just introduce themselves, where they're running, what is the state of the race, and really what is the driving or motivating factor for running for Congress in the first place. So maybe we can start off with Ihssane first.
Oh my gosh, I love going first. Well, good evening, everyone. And first, I just want to send my deepest condolences to anyone who has lost a loved one during this COVID-19 crisis. And I wish you all safety and health, and happy Ramadan to anyone who's celebrating. Yay, tomorrow is Ramadan for me. So with all that said, this is, my name is Ihssane Leckey. I'm running for Congress in the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts, and that is from Fall River to Brookline. My district is it's the mirror image of America. It's basically little towns clustered who have a huge wealth, and the remainder of the towns, we are 34 towns total. The remainder of the towns are working class people who have been underrepresented for generations. So this is the first time these people of the 4th district are feeling that they're being heard and that they have a shot at being represented and served. I am an immigrant from Morocco. I came to the United States when I was 20 years old. I grew up paycheck to paycheck. My father was a public school teacher. My mom was a farmer. And we, grew up on the values of helping our neighbors and helping people we don't know. And those values are truly what stood by me every step of the way. When I walked from Wall Street all the way up to Harlem into every restaurant seeking that first job. That job paid me sub-minimum wage. I faced sexual harassment and wage theft, and I had no protection. As a new immigrant who came to this country with a little suitcase of summer clothes and $1,000 in debt. I scraped every little dollar I made to put myself through community college, and I earned a scholarship of women in math to go to Boston University and become the first in my family to hold a college degree. But when I graduated, it was in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And if you all know or remember, the government sided with the corporates again. That time, they bailed out Wall Street. They did not bail the people who lost their homes and lost their jobs. And I was disgusted to see that happening in the richest country in the world. Just as I was disgusted to see people homeless, people hungry, people being paid sub-minimum wage and working 3 and 4 jobs and not being able to pay the rent. That story is the story of millions of people in our country and thousands of people in my district. I decided to fight back. I became a Wall Street regulator. I joined the Federal Reserve back when we had good leadership in the Federal Reserve. I walked into the boardrooms of the big banks like Goldman Sachs, like Morgan Stanley and Bank of America to make sure they're not gambling with our economy again and to plan for the future, to make sure if there is another economic downturn, they will not get a freaking bailout. And Trump dismantled all of that, threatened my Muslim community, threatened our immigrants community, continues to rip children away from their mothers and fathers, and not alone. We know he didn't do it alone. He did it and successfully because he found a government that is funded by the same corporations that I was fighting. And for that, I will not give up this fight. I will continue to fight for the working class and will continue to build that progressive bench in Congress with all of these amazing candidates who are with us here tonight. So I look forward to your support and to answering any questions you have.
Wow, that is so inspiring. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Can we hear from Samelys next? We'll kind of do some East Coast, West Coast.
Well, we're both on the East Coast, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
So Samelys, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What inspired you to run for office, and tell us a little bit about your campaign and the state of your race?
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I definitely want to thank you, Richard, and a Harvard student, the Harvard Bernie students for putting this amazing town hall together. I'm really excited to get to know the rest of the candidates a little bit more and get to know all the students on this town hall. And to echo what was just said, I also, send my condolences to anybody who's suffering right now due to the coronavirus epidemic. And happy Ramadan to all those who celebrate as well. In terms of me, I definitely believe in love, empathy, and compassion in everything that I do. I think that's definitely missing in our politics, especially right now in these times. So that's how I like to lead. And in terms of our campaign, that's basically like what we try to do every day. Right now, we're using our campaign as a public service to check in on our neighbors, to make sure that we're connecting them to vital resources, to food. So basically, yeah, that's what we're doing with our campaign right now. We're focusing on checking up on our neighbors, connecting them to food and resources. And in terms of myself and my personal experiences, I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican. I, was born in Puerto Rico. My mom worked in sweatshops to make ends meet. She was also a domestic violence survivor. So for the first few years of my life, we ended up in the shelter system to escape the abuse of what was going on at home. And because of those early experiences, watching my mom be exploited, be abused verbally, physically, emotionally, and us having not enough money to make the rent, to eat sometimes, on a day-to-day basis, really motivated me to fight for the underdog and to fight for social justice and to be a community organizer. And when I went to the public school system, I ended up, getting a master's in urban planning with a focus in community housing development, because I wanted to dedicate myself to the affordable housing field so that I can learn about the creative process to build housing, to prevent other children like myself and my brother from ending up in the homeless shelter system. So that's what I've been devoting my entire life to. I've devoted my life to public service, community organizing from the ground up, and building apartments, building homes here in the Bronx and in New York City to assist with the homelessness crisis that is overtaking our city right now. And in terms of the three major policy planks that we're fighting for homes guarantee, universal child care, universal health care for all. The child care piece is very, very important to me because when I was growing up, my mom didn't have money for babysitting at times. So she would pick me up from school and I would do my homework at the sweatshop. And there's so many people in the district that are experiencing that. The 15th congressional district, which is the district that I'm running in, it's known as the poorest congressional district in the entire country, but it's much more than that. It's 97% people of color. In my opinion, it's the most resilient community in the entire country because we basically survived the fires of the 70s and the 80s when the landlords were burning their homes for the insurance money, the homes of people in the community. And it was the people in this community that decided to stay and made this neighborhood what it is today. So this campaign, in a sense, is honoring our elder movement leaders from the past and drawing that inspiration so that we can continue to build from the ground up and honor those stories of human dignity, of struggle, and translate that struggle into collective action that'll lead to collective liberation for our community. And that's basically what our campaign is about, really simply. And it's about rectifying the imbalance that, where the 1% is basically taking over, right? And I don't have to tell you all this on this call. It's basically, that class is taking over our country, our communities, our democratic values. And we need a democratic and a radical distribution of wealth that flows from the 1% to the 99% right now. So we need to rectify the imbalance and give back to the workers and realize that it's the workers that create the wealth in this country. And that's what our campaign is about. So thank you so much for giving all of us this platform to engage and get to know each other, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Of course, and thank you that everything that you're doing for the South Bronx. You have a history of organizing in the community. That's how I was introduced to you. So thank you for everything. All right, can we go to Shahid next?
Sure, great to be with you again, Richie. Thanks for having me back, and I'm really excited to connect with the other candidates here today. A little bit about myself, is that what you wanted me to talk about?
Yeah, if you can just introduce yourself, your campaign, maybe tell us a little bit about the state of your race and the district that you're running in.
Sure. So I'm running in the 12th Congressional District in California. That's basically San Francisco. I'm an immigrant, constitutional lawyer, and artist, and I'm running as a expression of a longstanding concern about justice in this country. We just took second place in our jungle primary a month ago. We got 33,000 votes then. We do need to essentially double our support twice in the next 6 months. I'm the first Democratic challenger that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will have ever faced in a November election in the course of her 30-year career, and I look very forward to ending it with your support in November.
Great, thanks so much, Shahid. And last, but certainly not least, Joshua, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, the district that you're running in, what inspired you to run for office, and maybe some of the main things that you're going to be fighting for? Hey, Joshua, are you on?
Oh, I was muted, sorry. Yeah, a bit of background about myself. I'm 26 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm high school educated. I have no college degree. And my district is Washington's 10th district. Initially, I started this campaign challenging Congressman Denny Heck. He is a conservative who endorsed and campaigns for Republicans, one of which who is now running against me. He dropped out, and now we are running in a crowded race. So far, there are 4 Democrats and I think 5 Republicans. And so we are going to be running against a lot of opponents. What I'm about is trying to give representation to the working class and trying to build a movement of the working class. Those are my goals. I'm unapologetically on the side of renters rather than landlords, of homeowners rather than mortgage companies, of workers rather than executives and shareholders. And that is the tact that I'm taking. That is my strategy, my belief system, my values, and that's what makes me a socialist. I strongly believe that the working class should own and control the government and the economy, and I think that we need a party for the working class, and I think we need to massively change the dynamic of power in this country from being controlled by corporations and the very wealthy to actually being controlled by us, the working class.
Absolutely, and I think that many of the people on this call would agree with the assessment. All right, great. So without further ado, we will go on to the first question. Oh, we also want to thank our co-sponsors, Howard University for Bernie, Yale for Bernie, Texas State for Bernie, Spartan Solidarity Network, Colorado State University for Bernie, UConn for Bernie, UChicago for Bernie, Vanderbilt YDSA, and Northeastern YDSA. Thank you all so much for helping us advertise for this event, and also for submitting questions. All right, with that being said, the first question is from Caroline Choi.
Hi, this is a question directed to everyone. I'm a senior at Alameda High School in the Bay Area. I've seen Shahid at multiple protests, I'm pretty sure, in San Francisco. So I'm an activist with Extinction Rebellion and Sunrise Movement, and I've been working with them for a couple years now. And I've had the opportunity to put together national demands for the climate movement. So while reducing carbon emissions and enacting plastic bans are important, we believe that climate justice, particularly with Indigenous peoples, is one of our top priorities. And America has a terrible track record with honoring Indigenous land and treaties, and that's led to devastating effects of climate change on Indigenous communities. So we saw that with Standing Rock, and we see that kind of happening all the time without much media coverage or a lot of discussion in Congress. So I'm wondering, if you're elected, how do you plan on returning and protecting Indigenous land?
I'm happy to jump in there unless you want to direct it to one of us, Richie.
Yeah, so Caroline was very interested in hearing Shahid answer this question, but we'd love, every single question will be open to the entire panel, and we'd love to hear from everybody as well.
Word. So first, Caroline, thank you for your work as a student activist promoting climate justice. I applaud you in helping set the national agenda and creating the political will for this to be an object of policy discussion, finally, after decades of warnings by scientists that our corporate incumbents have refused to heed. And there are lots of different dimensions to climate justice. I'm grateful for you pulling out particularly Indigenous rights. As an immigrant to the United States, I feel very acutely the impact, not just on our communities here at home, but also on populations around the world of our corporate resource extraction, human rights abusing machine. And it is ultimately that intersection of corporate interests and the way it shows up as authoritarian power in the lives of powerless people, both in our communities here in the United States and around the world, that drives me to run for office. As a post-colonial advocate, my brand of democratic socialism is very deeply inflected with an anti-authoritarian and with a commitment to both past and future lens. And this question really brings it out. From a policy standpoint, in addition to all of the things that you described, and I do want to front and center the idea of transitioning to a 100% renewable energy infrastructure. In addition to those, I don't want to say obvious solutions, there are other intersectional solutions to climate justice that particularly address the needs and interests of Indigenous people that often get left off the table when we talk about climate justice. One of them, let's just talk about corporate resource extraction. Phase one is internalizing what market economists would describe as externalities. Every time in any mining or drilling context we allow for-profit resource extraction, we are stealing from the future, as well as the Indigenous communities whose resources we are plundering, often at the barrels of very expensive weapons. That idea of forcing companies to pay heavy fees to internalize externalities, that was yesterday's solution that we are long past. And that is a bare minimum. I would like to nationalize resource extraction industries so that there is not a profit motive in plundering the future. That's a more aggressive solution that will probably take us some amount of time to build the political will for in Congress. There's another intersection here, and then I'll pass it to others, and that is the intersection with militarism. When Dr. King warned us that racism and militarism and capitalism formed a noxious mix, nothing demonstrates it better than the crisis of indigenous communities on the front lines of the climate battle facing corporate resource extraction, again, with very expensive weapons. It is the intersection of racism and capitalism fomented by and supported by a militarism. And until we unwind all of it, we won't be able to find either solutions to respect the rights of indigenous communities or solutions for climate justice.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
I wanted to also quickly add to that. I think it's important that we recognize that the land that we're currently standing on was stolen from the indigenous tribes several centuries ago. And it's important to acknowledge that reality. And it's really important to think about reparations to the Native American community and the need to respect the treaties with Native Americans and invest in their communities. And consult them at every step of the way, because me, and as I'm sure the other panelists on this call can agree, change can only happen from the ground up, and policies cannot come from an ivory tower. It needs to be informed by directly impacted people first and foremost, and we need to honor the lived oppression that people have gone through in this country. And we need to honor that suffering and translate that suffering into collective action and electoral power in the community. And obviously, supporting things like the Green New Deal and bringing those communities in and reaching out to the Native American community, to people here in the South Bronx. I mean, the South Bronx is an environmental justice leader, and there's a very strong environmental justice community here that has engaged in local solutions that I think that the country and the entire world should look to for inspiration. And I'd be really interested to see a collaboration between people in the South Bronx and the Native American community in this country to see how we can learn from each other and build.
Yeah, that's just so beautifully said. Samelys, I saw in the chat that somebody asked if that's your district, if your district is AOC's district, and I want to clarify that no, it's not.
Yeah, no, not at all. So once again, I am running. So AOC has endorsed our campaign. So I'm running in the congressional district that's right next to hers. She is running in the 14th congressional district. I'm running in the 15th congressional district. And one of the things I forgot to mention in my opening remarks is that my race is really complex, because there's a bunch of corporate Democrats running in this race, taking huge sums of money from real estate developers to get their message out from the community, and a Democrat or a Republican dressed in Democratic clothing. So no, not at all. AOC is a friend of mine. She's someone that I respect deeply, and she endorsed our campaign personally a few weeks ago.
Great, congratulations on that endorsement.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just bring attention to this issue with the harmful policies and practices that have been, that have been done by our government towards the indigenous communities. Just a few weeks ago, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe faced the horrendous threat from Trump and his administration to remove the land trust for this tribe. And we hosted an emergency town hall live on Facebook, and we had the chief of the tribe, we had many other members who were appalled by this happening during COVID-19 crisis. Now imagine that during the COVID-19 crisis, your land would be stolen from you in the United States of America. That's what this tribe has been going through. And so in order for us to really protect the indigenous communities, we have to, number one, build trust relationships with the communities, with their leadership, and to really protect them and protect their resources, and to provide our, our campaigns are a platform for the voices of the people who have been shoved to the side over generations and silenced. Our platforms, we don't wait until we win. We do it right now. And that's what we did to make sure that the Mashpee Wampanoag have a voice, and people are organizing for them and signing petitions to make sure that we stop this from its beginning. But that's not the end. As you know, and as Samelys and Shahid mentioned, is that this is a, when you look at the structure behind why is it that the indigenous people's lands are being threatened over and over, it is obviously because the resources that are on those lands, either be it natural gas, either, for fracking, either be it other things. When we talk about the environment, when we talk about the Green New Deal, when we talk about putting an end to the fossil fuels, we are at the center of talking about what is the role that the indigenous communities play in our country, and how can we partner with them and learn from them as we go forward and get away from these fossil fuels altogether. But just know that there are instances when people who have been oppressed over generations are left without a choice, and where their own leadership starts to go against their own interests, because it's either choice A and choice B, and both choices are evil, and that's all that they have. So that's why we need to have a government that can empower the people of the tribes, right? And that can actually help them learn what is best for them, that can help them through, a just transition of labor if they have labor invested in fossil fuels, that can help them to make sure that their waters are clean if they had opposed fracking and fracking was imposed upon them. So these are the issues that we have to continue to pay attention to as we speak with the indigenous communities and respect their cultures and respect the knowledge, the depth of the knowledge that they have accumulated over thousands of years.
Thank you.
For me to go, do you want me to go real quick?
Yep.
So I'm autistic, and the way Greta Thunberg views the climate crisis is something that really resonates with me. And I've always felt like a lot of people in this country don't really take it seriously. And for anyone who does dive into like the climate crisis and what needs to be done, and like how we're actually going to solve it, like the sources of the problems are capitalism and colonialism, and this need for endless growth and resource extraction. And when you realize that, then and you look at indigenous resistance in America, you'll realize it's the same struggle. Like indigenous people in America have been fighting that struggle for decades and centuries. And right now they're to this date still on the front lines trying to protect our environment. They are spending millions, putting bodies like on the ground, and resisting in every way they possibly can to stop the Tacoma LNG plant and pipeline from being turned on, which was illegally built. And they have been doing so much just in our state alone, the Puyallup tribe and other tribes, to keep our land safe and try and leave a better planet for the seventh generation. And I think that's something important to know, is like we have a lot of lessons to learn from the success and the effectiveness of indigenous resistance against the fossil fuel industry and against these resource extraction industries. So I think that's something very important. We should hold spaces for Indigenous people in the climate movements, and we should always respect their agency, and also be sure to give aid to their causes whenever we can, and make sure that we're not trampling over their goals and their platforms. So, yeah.
If I can add just a couple more things, one of the things that bothers me sometimes about the environmental justice movement is that it tends to be white-led oftentimes, and it's very, very important to always center communities that have bared the brunt of environmental injustice first and foremost, and give them an intentional, create an intentional space for them to be heard and to be seen. And as much as I love the Green New Deal, I think it's very important and a landmark idea. I think that the Green New Deal, cannot be effective if we don't engage local frontline communities in its implementation. So it's very important to be intentional about seeking out those marginalized voices and letting them lead the conversation and diversify the environmental justice movement and the leadership in the movement itself.
Can I offer a thought there too? Oh, go ahead, after you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add that, and this actually has been happening in my districts a lot. I've been in organizing and in rallies, and I live in an area that's closer to the State House, to going downtown Boston, right, where all the action happens. And I go there and I see people from the northern part of my district, but I don't see people from the southern part of my district. And the southern part of my district is the part that has lack of economic opportunity, that has gateway cities, that doesn't have transportation. There's no public transportation that can zip you from Fall River to Boston. There isn't. There's people who have 2 and 3 jobs. They can't come out to a rally midday. They can't come out to organize at 6 p.m. for that rally when they have children waiting at home. My district has a high rate of single mothers. How do we expect them to come physically to a meeting downtown Boston to organize? And these are people of color. These are people of low income. So when we're organizing for the Green New Deal, when we're organizing in the movement for climate justice, we have, whether we're white or black, we have to center the most vulnerable amongst us who happen to be people of color. And we have to come to, this COVID-19 has tested every possible solution we could have had in organizing. We can organize with parents at a time where children have gone to sleep, and we can organize with people of color at a time where they're not at work. So we need to come to where people are. And just like Samelys, I urge people who are in the organizing to be inclusive of those who are facing the hurt and pain directly.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. This kind of reminds me about that time that Bernie Sanders got asked a question about climate change, and then they asked him, and then he started talking about racial justice, and they told him, no, this is a question about climate change. We'll get to that later. And then he schooled the moderators by telling them that, hey, climate change and racial justice go hand in hand, because communities of color, unfortunately, are the ones bearing the brunt of climate change devastation. All right, so now we're gonna move on to the next question, which is a question from Alex Blackburn. Alex is a graduate student in molecular plant science at the University of Idaho. And he has a question about food and agriculture. So Alex, are you on?
Hi.
Great. All right, Alex, go take it away.
So before I get into my question, I just want to give you a bit of background of where I'm coming from. So I'm actually from San Francisco. I was born at UCSF, raised in Palo Alto. Spent 4 years doing my undergrad at Washington State. I have a bunch of family in Dighton, Massachusetts, so right next to Fall River. And because of this, I've seen food and agriculture from multiple sides. I've seen it from the life of Palo Alto, where you have all your tech businesses and all your pharmaceutical businesses. And then I've seen it from middle of nowhere, Washington, and currently middle of nowhere, Idaho. So, like, what I want to know about is what's your guys' opinion on how we can change the food structure to both help out the people that are in the middle of nowhere, that are in the middle of the city, and help curb climate change and the effects on the environment.
Any of the panelists want to take a stab at that?
I've gone first before. I'm used to this by now. Well, hopefully this would actually help open up the conversation and other panelists can jump in, of course. Look, I grew up in Morocco. My mom grew up on the farm, and you know, it's a small farm. This is not, you know, industrial farming. Everything people ate was growing in their own land. Water was not a resource that's abundant. So that's something that we needed to deal with, and that, you know, communities across the globe are still dealing with. But something that I learned was this deep appreciation for the land. And I also learned from my mom and from my grandparents is that the way you treat the land, it will treat you back. If you plant it with love, it will grow plants that would nurture your body and would feed generations. And if you plant it with chemicals, it will feed you chemicals. And when I came to the US, I took a trip. My husband hates to fly. So I took a trip, a road trip from Boston to Texas. And I got to see land over land over land of cornfields. And I could not understand how would that be loving the land. If you're growing the same exact thing over and over and over, and then when I go back to Boston, a tomato is $3 and it's imported from somewhere else. We have so much land close by that if we were supporting our local farms, we could eat much cheaper, and even more than that. I lived in the, you know, you said you go to Temple University, Alex?
No, like, and I'm at the University of Idaho.
Idaho. So I lived in the Philadelphia area, and I worked at you know, pro bono at a food bank because I wanted to put an end to hunger and to food deserts. And at that time was the aftermath of the financial crisis, 2008, and people could not put food on the table. And one of the towns in Camden, they had run out of money that they couldn't even get food to people who live in food deserts anymore. That was a devastating experience that I saw in this country, is that when things go down, it's not the industrialized farmer who gets hit, it's the child who doesn't get food at the table. And unless we shift our farming from big industrialized to more local, more sustainable, more farming that we don't need, you know, to bring over, you know, don't we need to bring produce over airplanes and continue to you know, to contribute to the dirt in the air, we're not gonna be able to feed the people in this country. But we do have plenty of resources that can be shifted otherwise and be more sustainable. But I'm sure people, folks on the panel can chime in on this.
Yeah, so my dad, he was a farmer, and he used to grow a vegetable that's known as plátanos. I don't know if you guys are familiar with plantains, but that's how we say it in Spanish, plátanos. So he had a farm, you know, where he grew that. So I'm definitely sympathetic to the cause. And I think that we need to talk about localizing or relocalizing food production. I think that urban farms would be a step in the right direction. So we need to talk about relocalizing food production. Urban farms would be really incredible in that conversation. I know that there's a lot of community gardens that are in the neighborhood right now. And, you know, I want to point out that mutual aid to conduct because of, you know, the lack of food right now, the price gouging. So we need to do something to, you know, improve the production of food and help out our local farmers. And we can incentivize grocery stores and bodegas to, for instance, buy their food from local farmers through subsidies. And this may ensure that local farmers can get the revenue to keep their farms afloat and make them more easily able to compete with big agriculture. And I think that local stores can have access to fresh produce, and the community can have access to nutritious and affordable food, because I live in the community that is a food desert. There's the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center, which is the largest distribution food center, I think in the Northeast region, if not the world. And the community is basically starving. And we don't have access to healthy food choices. So, you know, we should definitely explore that. And as for dealing with climate change, one of the biggest contributors to climate change, as you may know, is the production of livestock for slaughter. So we can encourage people to adopt more plant-based diets by subsidizing farmers so that they can use their resources to grow fruits and vegetables as opposed to using them to raise cattle. Maybe, you know, furthering subsidies to provide farmers so that the price of fruits and vegetables can decrease, and so that we can kind of like engage in a cultural shift to maybe move towards a plant-based diet. So there's just some, you know, questions off the top of my head, or like solutions that I can think of. And maybe even thinking about something like universal food stamps for all. So I wanted to, you know, throw that out there. And again, I'm not a farmer, not an expert myself, so I'd love to stay in contact with you after this town hall, and maybe you can, you know, educate us a little bit more in the campaign so that we could expand and maybe come up with a platform.
Yeah, so I'm actually an advocate for this. I do a bit of work in DC with the current Congress, so I will be happy to work with anyone's, pretty much anyone's campaign. I'm free to travel. I'm supposed to be graduating in May and I don't have a job because of coronavirus. So
Yeah.
anyone.
Thank you for the question.
So there are a lot of things we could do about our food systems. You know, everyone knows that like a lot of the food that we grow gets like thrown out and gets destroyed and damaged out. But it's not just that it's wasteful, but it's also it's set up in a way to build short-term profits for corporations rather than to benefit the farmers. You know, currently most of our farmland is owned by large corporations, and I think that in itself is one of the biggest problems. We need to end factory farming. We also need to ban seed patents. I don't think you should be able to own a seed. We also need to end the use of antibiotics to, you know, make animals grow quicker. And there's a lot of other stuff that we could, you know, do that other countries do. You know, one country in particular is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. They have a really good, you know, system for their farming, and they also have they've had a really basic collectivist society for long before they were like officially a socialist country, and that means that they've had community gardens for a long time. Community gardens, if you don't know, are just gardens grown where you would normally put like flower bushes and lawns, and I think that's something that we do need to start implementing in the United States. I can't tell you how many people are growing like useless like grass in my neighborhood alone, rather than you know, growing fruit and veggies where they could be. And I think that's kind of the direction we need to go to. You know, there is a community garden in my neighborhood, and it's been really successful. People have taken care of it. The community has taken care of it. And I think that's what we would see around the country if we did start, popularizing the idea of a community garden.
Yeah.
Couple of
But,
thoughts here I'd add to that conversation. And I think this is really important to think about food security, particularly during a pandemic. I think a lot of people are very rightfully concerned that if a pandemic or a series of pandemics stretches into years, that there will be predictable threats to the food supply and food security. And we already have threats to food security, particularly in not just urban food deserts, but also many in underserved rural communities too. Appalachia comes to mind. Few policy solutions that get at the root here. One of them is corporate agricultural subsidies. So we have a agricultural subsidy regime driven by particularly the senators of Midwestern states in the Farm Belt. And those subsidies encourage mass overproduction of grains, particularly corn, wheat, and soy, which we then dump on foreign markets as so-called aid at cost cheaper than the local price of production, which undercuts domestic production capacity in those countries. So we're encouraging overproduction here, undermining production capacity in other countries, and particularly in war-torn areas, in some places, that basically contributes itself to the political instability that has a vicious cycle with the food insecurity problems in those particular places. So one of the things we have to do here is rationalize our subsidy regime so that if we're subsidizing anyone, it is small farmers and family farms that have increasingly been challenged, particularly with the costs of land and the cost of competing with large capitalized operations. Another piece here, almost on the other side of the equation, is guarding and defending and frankly restoring the rights of farm workers. Farm workers are disproportionately migrants. They're very widely exposed to pesticides, for instance. The public health in these communities is frankly long an example of the very same environmental justice issues that we were talking about in the first question that Caroline raised. And we have to see intersectionally the way that farm workers particularly present an intersection of agricultural policy and the rights of, at least in some people's cases, indigenous folks and people of color in other contexts, migrant rights more expansively. We have to guard the rights of people to have safe workplace conditions in order to ensure that they can continue to work. And that becomes obvious in the context of the pandemic and the workers who we have now finally deemed as essential as they have long been. That these people are folks who are put at risk every day to support the rest of us. And it's not just farm workers, it's grocery workers, it's people through the entire chain. And ensuring workplace safety for those workers is really critical and something we haven't done enough to do historically. In terms of establishing a right to food, as democratic socialists, part of our project is to expand public ownership. Part of it is to democratize workplaces. I conceptualize part of it as expanding human rights to include human needs. So there is a very robust debate at the moment over whether or not healthcare should be a human right. It seems to me like a no-brainer. I trust we'll talk about that later. Food, no less than shelter, also should be human rights because they are human needs, and there's plenty of it. So how do we get there? At the moment, we distribute, to the extent there are interventions in the food supply, they're means-tested programs like SNAP, right? Supplemental nutrition programs. We can have universal programs like free meals at schools, period, right? There are universal alternatives to means-tested programs that provide a baseline floor for anyone who needs it without having to go through layers of administrative red tape that themselves then consume the resources that we want to put into service delivery. And then finally, one last piece I'll throw out here. Here in San Francisco, we have a municipal composting program. Anybody can just put your compost out in a separate bin from your trash. It's picked up by the city and it gets composted. There's no reason we can't, in Congress, provide resources for states to make that kind of opportunity available nationwide. We have tons of food waste at the kitchen counter level. If we can recapture some of that and put that energy back into the soil and practice regenerative agriculture as policy, that will go a long way, not only towards ensuring food security for everyone, but it'll also have positive externalities in the climate context because that'll be carbon sequestering as well.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Shahid. We're gonna move on. So going forward, we're gonna ask that we maybe limit the responses to maybe two or three panelists, so we can try to get through as many as we can within the next 40 minutes. So moving on to the next question. All right. So the next question is from Anthony Davis, who's a freshman studying American Studies at Tufts University. Hey, Anthony, are you on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome.
Take it away.
So, so my name is Anthony. I'm a first year at Tufts. I'm also a trans man from North Carolina. That's where I am currently. And I led the Tufts for Brittany group on Tufts campus. And so my question is about the media. And a lot of like media commentators and organizers have tried to really get at the root of why the Bernie campaign was ultimately unsuccessful. And I wanted to know maybe your thoughts about the media coverage that Bernie received and how maybe that impacted a lot of voters that rely on corporate media to get the news. And along with my question, how has the mainstream media covered your campaign? Or have they covered your campaign? And how do you think the left can use the media in this way to actually help us rather than hinder us?
Do me go first?
I have a funny story. I can tell a funny story. So when I started my campaign in May, I was running against Joe Kennedy. And then I signed today, I filed today, right? And then the next day, the press comes to my doorstep. They rang my bell. I'm in my yoga clothes. You know, I'm a mom. I'm in my yoga clothes. I go check what's up, and I find this lady dressed impeccably, makeup. She's like, we have the cameras right here. Are you really running against Joe Kennedy? And I was like, yes, I am, but can we schedule something? And I just like figure out what is this? And so we scheduled something that same day in the Boston Commons, 1 p.m. I go, I hurry, I'm calling my team. I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna say to them. I know why I'm running. I know why I'm doing this stuff, but I've never ever done, a press meeting. I just don't know how to handle these things. I've never been on TV before. And so, it was just on the fly. But after that one, it was like death. Nothing, even local media wouldn't take anything from volunteers who want to post or from activists who want to send out op-eds. I had a journalist who wrote about my story and edited and sent it over and over, and they always rejected it. They told her they don't want to look like they're siding with someone. And I realized that it's not the journalist's fault. Never condemn the journalists because they are doing the best they can. It's when it goes to the producer, that's when you start talking about power in our journalism. That's when they decide, what do they put next to your name? Do you know how much it took for them to start putting next to my name, Wall Street regulator? It took a lot of back and forth and being very kind about it, being very sweet about it, to say, hey, I am a Wall Street regulator. I'm an immigrant. I'm a mom. Yes, do put Democratic Socialist. Do put that. I'm very proud of it. But don't single me out just based on my political views, because I do have a track record of how I fought for every person in this country. I do have a personal experience that millions of people connect with, and I want you to put that in that article and how you present me. That is my freedom to be presented in that way. So you have to fight for yourself. And even if we had this like long time of just silence, and you know, people, you know, every time they neglect you, you feel like they're neglecting your base. You know, the people that you're looking to represent, they're being silenced. They're not being invited to the public media. But we found other ways in progressive media, which is the heart and soul of our campaigns is progressive media, because people are genuine. They give you time to speak and to tell your story and to share the hurt and pain in your districts and what you're doing. And I value that media so much and invite everyone to invest in it and support the journalists who are doing that work. But now that it's an open race, it's a little bit different. You know, we're still kind of pushing against the waters, and we're still finding some public media that, you know, doesn't want to feel like they're singling out certain candidates, so they feel like they need to come and hear from Ihssane for Congress, and we do that, and we represent, and we show up, and we say the truth. So I'll open it up for others to tell their stories.
Well, I can give a pretty quick answer to this. So the mainstream media has actually been where I've gotten the most positive coverage for my campaign. And my secret to that has just been for me to do things differently from traditional campaigns. The things that have gotten me the most coverage have been my successful use of TikTok, my efforts with the Red Strike 2020 movement, and our creation of the Rose Caucus. Now, ultimately, in order to get mainstream media coverage, all you have to do is make sure you can get them clicks. But my local media has largely not covered me at all. I've been interviewed for a couple outlets, and they just flat out haven't published the interviews at all. So that's been frustrating. And I would say that it's a problem of people being connected with the political establishments. This is not necessarily as true with like the clickbait, you know, outlets like, you know, outlets like Mashable or something. But when you talk about like MSNBC and a lot of the TV outlets, and then a lot of local outlets that are owned by those media conglomerates, they are pretty accountable to like the Democratic and Republican establishments, and it's like a revolving door between, you know, people being politicians and then being media figures or being consultants. You know, a lot of people have done all three of those. So, you know, generally it's actually the swamp that Donald Trump referred to. You know, and that's something that if we want to break through, I think using social media is the biggest way to do that. You know, we've used social media pretty effectively. And I know Shahid has as well. So, and I think that's been the way we've gotten around the fact that the media largely doesn't cover me, especially locally. And, you know, I think, you know, getting hundreds of thousands of followers isn't nothing. And frankly, you can reach more people that way than you can if you get a few small time paper, you know, newspapers to cover you. So, so I think that's kind of like, for the left, that's our strategy, you know, just actually going around them and going straight to the people using the tools we're given, which is social media.
Just to pick up on that, and big props on your social media game too. You guys are killing it online, Joshua. And I see the opportunity for us to go straight to the people as an end run around corporate media sources. I've been very grateful to see the emergence of this independent media ecosystem that for our campaign has been really, really supportive. And I'm thinking here of the Young Turks of the world and the Sam Seder's Majority Report, Michael Brooks, you know, the Convo Couches, the Jimmy Dores, you know, there's this whole community of independent webcasters. And in our campaign, they've been quite critical in expanding our audience and helping us reach a community around the country that shares our concerns. I've been very fortunate, I think, in terms of having had at least some mainstream media coverage. The local paper of record, the San Francisco Chronicles, covered our campaign twice, once on the launch and then once more recently in the context of our mutual aid efforts responding to the pandemic. And I'm grateful for that coverage. And then there's also a community of national left-leaning press. And I'm thinking here of like Katie Halper and Matt Taibbi's show on Rolling Stone, which I've had the honor to be on, and similarly Crystal and Sagar's show, Rising on the Hill. So I see this evolution of outlets that are willing to offer to their listeners the meaningful alternatives that our voices present. I will just pause here and shout out two outlets in particular that I've been really, frankly, sorely disappointed in, and that is The Guardian and The Intercept. There are two outlets that have both quoted me more than once each on my issue advocacy long before I ran for Congress. And the idea that global outlets will quote an issue expert for their expertise as an advocate, but then basically turn a blind eye when you run for office on the very same issues against the architects of the policies that the editorial boards of those outlets are outraged by. And I'm thinking particularly here of mass surveillance and CIA torture. I've done a lot of work seeking executive accountability for civil liberties abuses and human rights violations by our own so-called national security agencies. And those outlets have liked my voice in that context, but won't cover our campaign. And they're nominally independent outlets. I can't even describe them as corporate media. These are independent outlets that have covered other congressional campaigns. In fact, they all went all in, for instance, on Representative Ocasio-Cortez's campaign, but you can't get them to write a story about any of the rest of us. And I do find that frustrating, disappointing, and at the same time that I'm excited by the emergence of this broader landscape. I would expect the heavyweights in the left-leaning media, frankly, to do a little bit more to support this part of the process of, frankly, supporting their own editorial concerns.
I want to give a quick shout out to outlets like the Humanist Report, Michael Brooks, the Ring of Fire for covering our campaign. Those are independent leftist media outlets that, you know, had the courage to get our story out there. So I think it's really important to highlight local, like independent national media because, you know, they're being assaulted every day by the corporate media establishment. So, you know, whether we are successful in our races or not, we need to continue to support independent media, you know, unapologetically. And I also want to give a shout out to Howard Jordan as well, because, you know, he's a progressive Puerto Rican activist and journalist that has very sophisticated views as to, you know, what people of color are thinking about on the ground. And it's also important to celebrate diversity in media and, you know, get our narratives out there as people of color that are, you know, oftentimes missed in the mainstream and also in progressive independent media as well. So, you know, I also want to give a little shout out to the New York Times. You know, we got lucky with them, and I used that piece to basically talk about the need for universal health care and the fact that I'm basically running without health insurance in my congressional race. So I think that, you know, when we do get lucky and when we get those mainstream media outlets to cover us, I think it's important to, you know, call out the establishment, like call out the importance of organizing from the ground up and center our stories so that we could uplift the most marginalized that don't have the privilege of accessing that media and share stories in our communities in those moments to highlight the struggles of what's going on the ground. So yeah, I just wanted to mention those and the importance of supporting independent media.
Great, thank you so much, Samelys, and to the rest of the panelists. So we have 25 minutes left. Let's try to get through as many questions as we can, and I still want to leave some time at the end for each one of you to tell us, you know, how everyone could get involved. So moving on to the next question. All right, so the next question is from CJ. He is a sophomore he's a political science major at Texas State University. CJ, are you on?
Yep.
All right, great. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. More than 1.5 million students reported experiencing homelessness during the 2017-18 school year, according to a study by the National Center for Homeless Education, with California the frontline with 263,000 students and Texas with 231,000 students. This is an important issue at my campus because the apartment complexes are really expensive to begin with. A majority of students at my university live off campus, and many went back home because of the pandemic, and we're still having to pay for them, even though we're not there, and that includes me. What would you do to address this? Do you support federal rent control, a homes guarantor? If so, what is your plan to implement this nationwide?
I'd like to take a shot at that. So thank you so much for that question. That question is near and dear to my heart because I, like I said earlier, devoted my entire life to fighting for affordable housing in New York City and to building it. So I am fully unapologetically supportive of fighting for housing as a human right. We need to decommodify housing in America. We need to target speculative land practices that artificially inflate the cost of rent. And we need to pass universal rent control at the federal level. And this would have several provisions. You know, you can cap rent increases to stop the price gouging committed by landlords and those abuses. I definitely support AOC's Place to Prosper Act as well. I also support expanding the housing voucher program and discrimination and preventing the discrimination against tenants due to their source of income. And right to counsel for all renters facing eviction, and also a just cause eviction bill to limit the grounds in which a landlord can evict a tenant. So I still want to take this moment to give a shout out to the housing movement space in New York City and New York State as a whole, because in 2018, housing activists on the ground from the Housing Justice for All Coalition got together to demand the strongest tenant rent protections that New York State has seen in a generation. And because of that, we have very strong tenant protections right now. And in addition to, you know, fighting for these housing movements and taking leadership from housing activists on the ground, we also need to create the right political conditions for those movements to flourish. So in 2018, the progressive community, me and many others included in New York State, we got together to defeat a set of rogue Democrats that were empowering Republicans to stay in power in Albany. So basically what that did is we supported insurgent grassroots Democrats to, you know, change the balance of power in Albany. And because of that, we were able to create the right political conditions for the housing movement to, you know, flourish. So we definitely need to take leadership from the housing justice advocates, the community. And I also actually planned, in collaboration with the City University of New York YDSA, a town hall to talk about this exact question that you're asking on the call. And we talked about in the CUNY community that there is a very high rate of homelessness, of food insecurity, and the students opened up about their experiences, and they talked about how the administration is failing them and is organizing against the students' best interests and is essentially engaging in the privatization of schools and college in CUNY. So, you know, it's really important to, you know, create forums to raise awareness and organize and share these stories to basically put those abuses forth so that we can come up with policies, you know, that reflect the experiences of the most marginalized in the community, with them, you know, being students. Like the CUNY students that I spoke to earlier this week are suffering. So I definitely support a homes guarantee unapologetically. And one of the first things, you know, I will do when I win this race, I will call Ilhan Omar up because she introduced the Homes for All Act. And we need to work to make sure that that piece of legislation becomes law in this country.
Hey, thank you for mentioning CUNY. You know, I went to Board of Manhattan Community College and part of the CUNY system, and that really made my life different, and I'm grateful for that and for the organizing that that happens in the CUNY system. I hope you get a lot of boots on the ground from that community, Samelys. Look, housing for me, for my personal experience, actually in New York City, Samelys. When I came from Morocco, I came straight to New York, and I moved 6 times in 1.5 years. The first thing I found out is that if you don't have a credit score, you can't rent. You need to have a co-signer. And when you come to this country, you don't have a credit score. And then you go to the bank and you try to open a bank account and you don't have any money. and you are an international student, or you're, you know, still on your visitor visa trying to transfer to international, or if you're undocumented, or if you're lesser of a human being in this country if you weren't born here. And even if you were born here, if your parents and their parents weren't born here, you're lesser. And then talk about what your skin color is, what your mother tongue is, all of that factors in. And that is so reflected in the opportunities of housing, because your zip code still determines your education in this country. It still determines your quality of water and quality of air. And even here, and I'll tell you, I live in Brookline. It's generally a wealthy community. In public housing, in the wealthy community of Brookline, people are living in mold. And those are people, mostly people of color in public housing, as well as elders who have gone bankrupt because of healthcare problems and healthcare bills. So when we talk about housing, and and I am a homes guarantee candidate, I've signed the pledge. I don't take money from developers. Every time the dialogue about housing comes up, and of how a lot of the towns kind of locked themselves so that nobody can come in. We have great schools here, but who can afford to live here? Who can afford to live here? You have to have a lot of money to be able to send your kid to a good school, and that needs to stop. And housing is the way to also, I do support fully funding schools, and I do want people to have schools in every zip code. And I also want that no town is locked on other people to come in. The issues of homelessness that Samelys raised, especially in the student community, is not new. It has been exposed by COVID-19. It has been exposed. It's not new. A lot of my friends at school were living out of their cars, and a lot of people in my district now, especially in Bristol County Community College, they are living out of their cars. They are living out of the streets because there's no other home for them. The workers who come to the wealthy towns to build the developers millions of dollars worth of condos, those workers can never afford to live in those condos, and their children can never afford to live in those condos and send their kids to good schools. This is the structural problem that we have to tackle head on when we're talking about housing. There's a lot of potential in building 12 million units of affordable housing across the country, to making sure it's all green and it's all integrated. I hate the fact that older people are forced to be so secluded in our communities. See, I didn't grow up like that. I grew up with my grandma, living with everybody, being taken care by everybody, and rearing her grandchildren. And that integrated life gave her much better mental health, gave her much better physical health, and she lived longer and happier. And I want to see our elders, our grandparents, having that opportunity to live in areas where there is a playground, where their grandchildren run around, where small businesses are diversified and affordable, where long-term care is guaranteed for them, and where housing is not a punishment for being old or for not fitting in a designated box. So that's. Thanks for raising this really excellent question. Thank you.
I just want to add a couple of things to the conversation, or really reiterate one thing in particular that Samelys had noted, and that was the right to civil representation for people facing eviction. A few minutes ago, I was talking about how we want to take to DC the composting program here in San Francisco that we have municipally. Another thing that we have here in San Francisco, and I think New York is the only other city in the country that has locally made a requirement for people facing eviction to have access to a publicly funded lawyer. That is a big, big deal, particularly for people at the tip of the spear. I encountered housing insecurity myself as a young person in Chicago. My family lost our home to foreclosure. I started college the following fall, and by the spring of the next year, I was effectively on the street. And I had friends, frankly, who I'm very grateful for keeping me from the worst of it. But that kind of experience will both steer into your perspective the distinction between capital interests and labor interests, and it also reflects the way that we have treated housing, shelter, space as a commodity instead of as a right. Now, I want to make clear here that the generation of policymakers that preceded us over the course of the last 30 years, they have presided over a nearly complete collapse in federal spending on affordable housing. We used to dedicate billions of dollars a year to block grants to states to incentivize property developers to include affordable units when they would build new complexes. That budget fell through the floor by like 80% over the last 30 years. And it's not as if the money that we've saved in that context by abandoning affordable housing at the federal level has in any way reduced the deficit or anything. Our increases in military spending vastly outpace whatever savings we've had by abandoning support for renters in the housing market. So ensuring a national right to civil representation for people facing eviction, restoring an era of social, publicly owned housing accountable to residents in communities. There's a huge opportunity there, and that's the socialist vision for housing that I think we all support, a homes guarantee that centers a right to housing in publicly owned infrastructure so that housing is not just an object of market-based speculation for people to use as economic rent-seeking opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything everyone else said. One thing that I guess I specify is that we need to repeal the Faircloth Amendment. It was some legislation passed during the Clinton administration that made it illegal for the Department of Housing and Urban Development to build public housing. So right now they can't even pay for public housing to be built. That's why we have Section 8, and that's like basically all the resources that were going into public housing have been shifted into Section 8. I think we need to directly build public housing that is quality and that is also energy efficient. And as congressional candidates, if we do get in Congress, not only support those efforts on the federal level, but support local Green New Deals that include building, socially owned houses as well. So that's what I plan to do.
I can't help but to mention, because we are in COVID-19 crisis, right? So everything that we were supporting before COVID-19 is now, it's now on like much higher demand and urgent demand, including, what about tenants' rights right now? A lot of people couldn't pay the rent this month, and they are not able to pay the rent this coming month because the $1,200 check hasn't even arrived for many people, let alone whether it's going to be able to actually cover anything. I hate to call it the bullshit check. It doesn't really mean anything, especially when you're talking about people who live in New York or in Boston or in areas where $1,200 doesn't pay you the rent, let alone food on the table. So one of the things that I would urge is to make sure that we need the rent bailout. We need the people's rent bailout. We need to make sure that people aren't being punished for not being able to have a job right now that's going to pay them to pay that rent. And so I know that Ilhan Omar put out a bill. I think it's, I can't remember the exact number of it right now, but she did put out a bill that supports many of these measures. And I hope you guys can be in support.
Awesome, excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. We're gonna try to squeeze in 2 more questions. All right, let's see if we can get this done. All right, so the next question is from Brendan. He is a junior studying political theory at Michigan State University. Brendan, are you on?
I am. Hello.
Go away.
Hey, you guys. Thanks so much for talking to us, and thank you to Harvard for putting this together. Really awesome event. So ever since, also shout out to Spartan Solidarity Network. We got like 10 people on here from Michigan State. So, the reason why we have 10 people here is because we didn't stop when Bernie lost Michigan. We kept going. We had a meeting the other day on Saturday with 23 people over Zoom, which was like, would have been a big meeting for during the semester. And what we're doing is focusing on using our power and our organization to focus on our university and the administration and try to improve conditions for working class students and workers on campus that aren't students. And so my question is, how can we as students, whether we're working or not, connect with the labor movement and workers, and how can we best support workers at our universities and within our communities?
I can take a whack at it. So one thing you can do as a student is you can join a union. So there are a lot of like student unions that you can do that with. Also, if you are going into a career field, try to get a union job. But also, if you do get a job, be aware of how you can actually unionize a workplace. A lot of people don't realize how easy it is. It's risky and it's all that, but there are a lot of people who will support you in your efforts, especially if something were to happen, if you like getting fired from a job in order to unionize. It's kind of on us to actually, sorry, my dog. We actually have to be the ones to like organize our workplaces, and just all you have to do is get like over 50% of your coworkers to unionize with you, and it's a pretty simple effort from there. And that's kind of what we need today. We need a mass unionization effort, and if you can join unions and try to radicalize unions as well, because we do have some that don't really are kind of more moderate, and that's always a result of low participation in those unions. So we need a movement of people joining unions. I think that's really the solution to connecting with labor. And so yeah, I hope hopefully we can go in that direction. But if you have a small workplace in particular, let's say you work at like a Taco Bell, that's probably the easiest place to unionize, because you only have to convince like 3 or 4 people. So having a small workplace is one of the places that are actually easier to unionize. So just kind of remember that. And if you need help, contact your local unions, or go to the IWW, and there are tons of resources that will help you for every step of the process.
Maybe just to add to that, 2 suggestions I'd offer. One, in your capacities as students, you have some degree of leverage in your university administration environment. So making sure that your university administrations are employing unionized workforces is one set of campaigns that you can consider running on your campus. Another opportunity here is just to demonstrate solidarity and ask the folks who you see working in the different sectors on your campus, the folks in the dining halls, the folks who are, cleaning spaces, ask them if they're unionized, ask them if they need support. And taking leadership from the people who are most affected. This came out before in the context of climate justice and indigenous communities, but taking leadership from the people who are most affected on the front line is a crucial element of liberatory praxis that respects the integrity of the social struggles that we aim to support. There are lots of savior complex models that place the actor's will in front of the communities that need our support, but that's, we've seen that before and it doesn't tend to help much. So I'd invite, do whatever you can to open your ear, proactively show up in spaces that might be obscure to you. So that a lot of times that can literally just look like asking people who you're trying to stand in solidarity with where you should be. And a lot of times those folks will have ideas. Organizing amongst other students so that you're not just acting in individual solidarity, but in organized solidarity can present a real opportunity there. And I would encourage folks also to look beyond your campuses. We're living in an era of profound historic labor mobilization. We haven't seen strikes at the pace that we have recently in several generations. And I'm thinking now of the Red State Revolt among teachers even in states where they didn't have labor protections, wildcat strikes, and other professions. It's just showing up in solidarity with the strikes and the pickets that might be off campus, but still within, for instance, driving or transit distance, is another way that you can help support the labor movement wherever you're at.
And to add to everything else that has been said, I think it's really important to educate communities about unions. Because I know, for instance, for me, I didn't grow up in a union household. I didn't know what a union was until I was an adult. And had I known about unions and been connected to that movement, and had my mom been connected to that movement, we probably wouldn't have gone through all the hardships that we ended up going through in our life. So I think it's really important to educate local communities about the importance of unions, the importance of labor, empower them, they understand that they have rights in the workplace, that they can organize. And I wanted, to mention that, and also take leadership from the rank and file of unions, and work with them to politicize them and to radicalize them, like what Josh was saying earlier, because sometimes the union bosses sometimes are tied to real estate interests and corporate interests, and they're not taking the right, they're not making the right decisions on behalf of the communities, because they're thinking with, maybe like their business pockets, right? So I think it's really important to look at the rank and file as a way to gain that inspiration so that we can push the labor movement forward. So I wanted to talk about that. And I also wanted to use a platform to give a big shout out Spectrum strike workers that have been striking against Spectrum for the past 3 years. I believe that's the biggest strike right now in the country. And I encourage you guys to check them out, to support them. The workers have been without a contract for the past 3 years. And I've been, standing in solidarity with them for the past few months. And their cause is just, and we need to go out and support them in any way that we can. And one of the things that they're fighting for is a free broadband internet. In places like the South Bronx, it's really relevant because there's a big digital divide. So like everybody has said, these are things that we can do to support and stand in solidarity with workers around the country and in our own local communities.
Yeah, listen to that. Big digital divide means that not all of us get to homeschool their children. If you don't have that access to internet, your kid is out if you really want to focus on that academic side right now. But yeah, thank you all for sharing this. I just wanted to add a few points. Look, unions really care. They really care about immigration justice. Unions in my district care about the undocumented, give them the same rights as everybody else, including coverage of healthcare. They care about housing justice. They care about a lot of the issues that are at the center of our movement. What we have to keep in mind when we come across leadership that is quote unquote not so progressive, right, or conservative in their thinking, know that in all oppressive systems, there's a way to get the oppressed to believe in the oppressor, right? There's a way to get the oppressed to side with the oppressor by leaving them no choice, by choking them with this, either you're gonna do this or else, right? So you find sometimes leadership that is so worried about the job of the members. They want to get jobs for the members, but they don't have choices because the government is not siding with the workers, right? We're leaving them to the wolves, right? Our government is leaving the workers to this idea of pure capitalism without any way of social support or of workers' rights or anything. The movements before us that have gotten us the right to a weekend, right? Never forget those movements. Those movements is why many people like me get to spend a weekend with my child, right? Not when I'm on the campaign, of course. But I want to remind you that the value of unions. Also, open a bank account at a union bank. Why don't you do that? Union banks are good. They're good for the community. Most of them are really great banks. Interest rates are very low for loans. They might not have the you know, a lot of the fancy stuff you get from big banks, but you know, you're supporting a certain community. Again, you know, volunteer with the unions. Go ask them what you can do for them. It's an opportunity for you to learn and to give back. They do offer a lot of trainings if you're looking into going into trades. You know, take a year, go into trades, go look what that, you know, experience something that's outside of what you're experiencing in college. You will be paid, you'll have benefits, and you will learn about the values and the value system of the unions and how you can fight for them when you get other jobs.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I was wondering if the panelists have time for one last question. It'll be a speed round. We'll do, you know, 30 to 45-second responses, all right? So let's just move on to the very last question, which is this one here. This is a question from Jocelyn Bravo. She is a senior at University of Illinois, Chicago, studying economics. Jocelyn, are you on?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So thank you all so much for being here today. It's been so inspirational to follow your just experiences in running a campaign. And my question is really in regards to what I have personally seen in the progressive movement these past 4 years. And that is that there really hasn't been a consolidated effort to unite as a singular voice among progressives. You guys mentioned the Humanist Report, you know, there's Jacobin, Current Affairs, there's Secular Talk, these great progressive medias, and we have great progressive and leftist fighters. However, I think that, again, there is a divide. So my question is, what can leftists and independent media do to lift each other up? What can leftists, particularly politicians across the country and world, do to consolidate their power and amplify others' voices?
30 to 45 seconds. We don't want to hold up the panelists.
Well, we need to build our own media power, right? Just like there's establishment media, we need our media power. And for that, we're gonna need to make sure we're funding good media jobs. We're creating a great media industry that is focused on the real progressive issues and the real agenda that we're fighting for and centering the working people in this country. And also reporting, you know, reporting the truth, not reporting fake stuff or siding with establishment only. Like, we want honest media, and we have to create that movement, and it's gonna need money, and it's gonna need masses of people who are willing to do it. I'm in.
This is not a structural macroscopic solution, but a tactical one, a tactical suggestion for anybody in terms of how to participate in that project of building left. Think global, act local, and write about it. If you write for a public audience, and you know, we have lots of opportunities in today's ecosystem to be the media or to wrest it free from, you know, the reins that it might rest in, but, you know, promoting your own content. And I just want to focus on writing. There is such value. All of you are students. You know, you're exploring issues, you're examining them. If you write for a public audience, it does a bunch of things. One, it establishes your credibility on a set of issues. Two, it will build a track record of your thoughts over time. And three, most importantly, it will force you to understand with the rigor necessary to write and teach issues, the issues that otherwise can be objects of merely casual concern. So I would just very strongly encourage each of you to look for opportunities to write, whether that's blogs, book chapters, academic articles, less academic articles. There's just any opportunity you can get to write about your thoughts and to participate in that discourse, not just as a consumer of media, but as a producer of it, is a real revolutionary opportunity that the current technology and culture affords.
I think that also some of the responsibility falls on us as people who are running, you know, for office and politics, to create that space. for those voices to be included in the conversation. So in terms of our campaign, increasingly we've gotten more media attention, a lot from the progressive left, but increasingly from mainstream sources. So what I try to do is I try to think about stories that people have shared with me on the ground, in our phone banking efforts or our previous door knocking efforts before the pandemic hit. And I try to like catalog like what people tell me, so that if there is an opportunity for me to share it in media, I take advantage of that. And I not only talk about my campaign, but what people are going through on the ground. And I think that me personally, I definitely want to be more intentional about including those stories moving forward, in that conversation, because I think that's a great way of using campaigns for the public good and to further people suffering, right? To give it attention. Because there's a lot of unsung heroes in our community that are struggling to get by. And I think it's really important to put those stories forth, because at the end of the day, most people in America, they're not rich, they're not billionaires. Most of them are making $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, you know, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, you're in the Green Party, you're in the Republican Party, like, you know, people are suffering across the board. So I think it's really important to use these opportunities and to use media to kind of like talk about the commonalities that we have in terms of the suffering that we're going through under this oppressive capitalistic system, you know, so that we could share in our humanity and figure out a way forward.
And don't forget about public media. Fund your public media. You know, I'm so proud of our local public media that has, you know, covered us many times, and we, you know, their budget is being cut by the Trump administration. Another way to oppress free speech.
So I think what we need to do on the left is eventually we need to establish a third party that is successful. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we do need to keep that in our minds, how we do establish a third party that doesn't, you know, depend on the Democratic Party. And, you know, whenever we do actually manage to do that, I think that is how we're going to get past a lot of the structural barriers that people face in the Democratic Party. I think, you know, that will also lead to different treatment from the media if we actually can manage to build a successful third party. And, you know, as far as social media, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing about, you know, building up other candidates. I've been pretty transparent about my experiences as a candidate, you know, the things I've struggled with, the things that have been very difficult, and the things I've done very well. And I think that's really important. You know, AOC also did that really well on her Instagram Live and stuff. And I've done my best to share like the things that I've learned and kind of give warnings for people who are interested in getting involved or interested in running for office. And I think it's important for us to always remember like who our audience is. You know, the vast majority of people don't have like the same amount of knowledge we do about the political process. And so if we assume that they all know what we're going through and what we're doing and how to do this, then we'll just be flat out wrong. You know, the people who actually know what it's like to run for office and know what it requires, the rules, and you know, just generally what obstacles you face, those people are a very small minority of the very politically interested people, and the rest of the country, the people who we need to you know, bring into this and you know, educate on this and also get them interested in into this with you know, by frankly just, you know, reaching out to them wherever they are, whether that's TikTok or Instagram, or if it's you know, in their community spaces and churches, you know, wherever we can reach them, we should be doing so.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Now I want to turn the floor back to the panelists one more time. So you can just, you know, go around, give everybody who's on the call right now, I think there was around 140 people on the call right now listening in, and tell them where they can go and, you know, learn more about you, support your campaign. I know that we at Harvard for Bernie have done some remote phone banking for Shahid in the past. So, you know, now that everything is remote, there really isn't any excuse not to get involved, right? So, you know, please tell everybody how they can support your campaign from afar. So we'll just go down this in this order here. Ihssane, do you want to go first?
You want me to go first? Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. We'll go in the order listed here on the screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again so much for hosting and for organizing this just great discussion. And thank you for the panelists also for joining me here. Look, this seat in Massachusetts 4th District has been historically represented by corporate Democrats. And we want to change that history for the working people of this district who have been underrepresented for generations. So my ask to you is, as you showed up today in 140 people, right? I want you to show up for every person in this panel. I want you to show up for our progressive movement. We all have different dates of when our primaries are. We all have different deadlines. We all have to raise money until we make sure that our campaigns are publicly funded. And fortunately, we have to raise money to be able to get to the voters and to make their voices heard and acknowledge their existence and that we're fighting for them. So my ask to you is to volunteer, to make phone calls. We're making we're making COVID-19 check-ins on phone banking. We're still not, my campaign, we're still not on the ballot yet. We're still collecting signatures during COVID-19, which is very tricky, but you can just do some phone calls and we mail people the signature sheets and they mail them back. So please volunteer, go on ihssane.org, IHSSANE. I wrote it in the chat. You can also email us directly at us@ihssane.org, us@ihssane.org. And you can also call me. I think the phone number is on my website as well. I'm here available to you. And please support me and support Shahid and Joshua and Samelys as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. In terms of our campaign, you can check us out at lopezforthepeople.com. Again, we're running in a very complicated race. There's about 15 people in our open primary. And like I said earlier, it's a bunch of corporate Democrats taking huge sums of money from the real estate development community, who have been formerly elected officials that have pushed rezonings in the community and are tied to real estate interests. So this community is very near and dear to my heart. Obviously, I'm from here, and this community is experiencing a gentrification and a displacement crisis. So we cannot afford to send people that are tied to the real estate developer community to Washington. We need to send a working class, grassroots person who's lived through the experiences of people here in the community that believes in a homes guarantee and is against the corruptive force of big money in politics. So right now what we're doing is we're using phone banking as a primary way of engaging voters in the district. Before we were doing a lot of door knocking, but before the coronavirus ended up hitting us, and then we had to shift from in-person door to door to phone banking and texting. So right now we're using our campaign as a public service to check up on our neighbors, to figure out how we can connect them to food and other resources. And we've updated our website as well to include resources for the community. So I encourage you to go to lopezforthepeople.com. If there's a resource that you feel we should include in the website that can help out constituents, please let me know and go to info@lopezforthepeople.com. But definitely donate, sign up for a phone bank, follow us on social media at Samelys Lopez on Twitter and Instagram, and stay connected. It was a joy, being here tonight and listening to all of the feedback from the candidates and what they have to say and all of the questions. And I wish that you guys are safe and that you have everything that you need to stay safe from the coronavirus. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
You want to go next, or you?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Samelys and Ihssane and Shahid. There's actually another time Shahid and I were on the same like event, and he like really hyped me up before I went up to speak. He was on like a live stream with a projector, and so he was hyping me up, and then the announcer hyped me up, and then I went and spoke in front of this big crowd, and it was one of the best speeches I've ever given, and it was received so well, and so I did want to thank you for that. It was a huge help for me. But yeah, my campaign, what we've done to adapt to the situation is we are focusing on, of course, phone banking, also building up our Discord capability and digital canvassing. We are trying to ID voters with a Google form that we have people to share around. And so that's something that we have been working on launching right now. And basically you just have people tell their friends to fill out this survey, and that survey asks you questions about my campaign and others, what policies are important to you, and that's how we're getting a lot of data for the voters in our district. Fortunately, in my election, we already have online registration in Washington State. We have a 100% mail-in ballot system, which means we were already prepared for a situation like this, and we are in a position to still be able to have people vote for us without risking their lives. And I think that's a really important factor in our campaign. My opponent did drop out, and now I'm running in a crowded field, and we're running against a bunch of establishment figures and in the Democratic Party, and a bunch of pretty boring guys on the Republican side. So basically, I'm the only blue collar worker. I'm the only one with any chance of actually winning. That's from the working class and not a career politician. And I'm also the youngest serious congressional candidate in the country. And if elected, I'd be the first truck driver, which would be pretty cool. So if you want to go to our website, it's joshua2020.com. You can check out our policy platform. You can watch some of our interviews, and our Discord link is broken. So if you need that, you can go to my Twitter account. It's one of my pinned tweet. So and you can join our Discord and help us with digital stuff. So yeah, thanks.
Great. And now turn it over to Shahid.
Big shout out to everybody who joined us tonight, the panelists, my fellow candidates, Harvard for Bernie for hosting us, all the students for offering your questions. You can check out our campaign at shahidforchange.us. We're on each of the major social media networks, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitch now at Shahid for Change. Sign up to volunteer. I will say that we've got a very robust field operation, and like some of my colleagues on the panel, we've in the last month pivoted largely to wellness checks. We are shifting back to voter outreach now. Anybody anywhere can plug in. We've got 6 months to flip a single city, and I am on the ballot. It's just me and Pelosi in November. I'm looking forward to liberating the seat. I'm looking forward to serving alongside Joshua and Ihssane and Samelys in Congress, and I'm looking forward to hopefully supporting some of your voices as candidates in a future cycle.
All right, so that about wraps it up. Oops, sorry, having some computer issues here. All right, well, that about sums it up. Well, I want to thank our panelists one more time, Ihssane, Samelys, Joshua, Shahid. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on what is the issues that students care about most. And I think that a lot of people were inspired by what they heard, and I'm hoping that people run over and go to their websites and sign up to volunteer. But again, want to thank you so much, and I really want to reiterate that we at Harvard for Bernie and a lot of and students for Bernie groups across the country really look up to you all as like I said, leaders of a movement that's far bigger than Bernie. I think that international solidarity and has been mentioned here, and I think that that's something that we all truly believe in, and I think that that's why a lot of us are supportive of your campaigns. We think that it's time to end US imperialism, American exceptionalism, and really put working class warriors in office to represent the interests of the working class, and that's how we view you. And you know, we're thankful for everything that you're doing. All right, everybody, that about wraps it up. Have a good night, and you know,
buenas noches.
follow us on social media for round 2 of
Relajen.
All right, everybody, take care.
Take care. Good night.
Have a good night. Bye.